is the Morning Crossfire on 92.3 Nigeria Info. Sam Oracle Chinedu here. Important conversations happen here. One is about to happen now. And this, at this time, is the biggest story out of River State. It is the Woji youths protesting at different times. What would be termed police misconduct, brutality. There are lots of things we can call it, but the investigation is still ongoing. But the latest in what has made it is an heavy area last night. Some youths who had resumed protests clashed with the police. The youths were seen throwing broken bottles and stones at the police as tires were set on fire on the streets of Woji to protest the death of Nyebuchi Eze, whose body was recovered yesterday after days of disappearance from the custody of the officer in charge of surveillance. It was gathered that the OC surveillance was invited by a tenant whose landlord, the late Nyebuchi, had thrown his belongings out of his home following a dispute. The landlord disappeared afterwards. It took the intervention of the Woji Council of Chiefs to draw police attention to the situation and demand that the police officer reveal where he had hidden the body, as Nyebuchi was last seen in his police van. The officer and tenant were taken into custody afterwards. A protest started on Saturday to demand Nyebuchi's body as youths went on rampage, blocking the road, damaging some shops and looting. I'll see from that in the company of 4 Woji chiefs yesterday, of course, and the family of late Nyebuchi. The police recovered Nyebuchi's body from an incomplete building in Jokocho-Eche, miles away from the police division that arrested him. Scores of angry youths blocked the road in Woji area afterwards. Former youth president of the community, Ken Owo, tells our correspondent that the recovery of Nyebuchi's body sparked another protest in the community because the body was found in bad condition. Most of the conversations we have on radio stem from the questions that are connected to stories like this. Because when you hear these kinds of stories, you naturally have questions. But the bigger question is, who do you ask the questions you have in mind? Will you get an answer? My guest will be joining me shortly. He's a legal practitioner, Henry Ekine, a human rights lawyer, because a lot of what is in this report has to do with abuse of human rights. But the big question for this conversation is, should the police be a part of a tenant and landlord dispute? The lawyer will obviously answer that from the legal angle. But still on this, the older brother of the victim, a former chairman of Obiakpo local government area, Solomon Abel, Ekine, tells our correspondent that his family wants the police to take his brother's body to a government-approved facility for proper investigation.
The officers in charge of the investigation of the murder of my younger brother, they went on the spot assessment at the scene, and then from there, they recovered some certain things, some clues of the disease, and then they carried the suspect to where they say is the mortuary in the Woji local government. And they saw the body there with bruises all over. So what we are calling on the police is to do the needful by taking the cops away to the government to organize more for proper preparation and then for continuous investigation.
Mr. Abel, AK also appealed to the youth in Woji community not to take laws into their own hands.
The youths are not happy hearing all that because the people that went there to the community and my family people and all that went there, they came back. They got angry and started rampaging again, which I have been warning them. Nobody should take law into his hand. Nobody should demonstrate violently and disrupt activities in the community. And in support of that, I want a peaceful environment so that all hands on the police will do their job. We too, family members who are concerned and the community at large. Also, that we are paid by what happened. It's not accepted anywhere at all, and we will not let it go like that.
And earlier, the paramount ruler of the community, Eze Meka Ihuwa, told our correspondent the body had head, jaw, and other injuries showing he was beaten before his death. He, however, called on the youth of the community to maintain peace, saying justice would be served.
The chiefs, who represented the entire community of Woji, they saw the cops, was kept alongside some other cops. In an uncompleted building, he had an injury on the head by his ear side of his jaw. And they also have another injury by somewhere between the heart and the tummy. That one is almost killing people. And then they kept him there and covered him with a cloth.
Now, the reason why we might not get some of the answers to our many questions is because at this time the case is currently before the State Criminal Investigation Department, and the police have not officially spoken on this. So obviously, the fact that it's with the state CID means that investigation is ongoing, but there are too many questions. Some concerns raised this morning on the newspaper review from some people who live in Ekine is why was his body discovered in Ekine? The arrest was made on Woji, and now body is dumped in Ekine. Investigation should reveal most of that. But my concern, and I'm not even sure who's in the best position to answer this particular question, is why has the police not learned from previous cases and incidents of brutality and abuse that has not ended well for the police? It is not too long ago, citizens of Rivers State, and indeed Nigerians, have not forgotten the Chima Ikunado case. Nigerians have not forgotten the NSAS protest. Why do we still have stories in the news that suggest that a person was beaten to death and the perpetrator, a police officer? Well, joining me to answer the questions connected to this conversation from the legal angle is Henry Ekine, a human rights lawyer. Good morning, Mr. Ekine. Thank you for making the time.
Good morning, Mr. Sir. It's my pleasure to join you this morning.
Yes, indeed. Always a pleasure. Thank you. Now, the story has led to a very sad, bend, because this is not the end. And we understand from the reports that it started as a landlord and tenant dispute. It has now led to the death of a person, and a lot of questions will be answered. We'll get to the human rights angle of this. But, Ms. Ekine, what are the laws binding landlord and tenant matters called? And are these laws publicly accessible? Do I have access to them? Does a tenant, a landlord, can they easily access these laws?
Yes. Let's start with the fundamental and most general contractual laws. A landlord-tenant or tenancy relationship is a contractual relationship. It's a civil contractual relationship. So the law of contract and the general principles of contract bind the landlord and the tenant. That's number one. Okay. Then fundamentally, you have in the respective states, you have tenancy laws. And you also even have rent, probably in some cases, even rent courts or rent tribunals or special courts for that regard, and rules that regulate that relationship. So, like I said, the fundamental principles of contract, because the relationship is a contractual one, and that's why when you even establish that relationship, it's expected that there should be the tenancy agreement, and then that both parties will be clear as to what obligations and rights that inure to them. And then with the same principle of respect, the sanctity of contract, respect to the terms and the conditions in that contract apply to tenancy agreement. So like I said, generally, you have those laws, like the tenancy laws in respective states, and then even rent recovery laws. In some cases, you could even have special courts for those purposes. Then the fundamental provisions in our Constitution with respect to the guarantee of rights of citizens also have relationship with tenancy agreements and tenancy relationship because of the implication of rights that inure to either party. So as we go on this conversation, one can probably take time to expound on those obligations and rights of parties in tenancy agreement and tenancy relationship. Okay,
so the second part of the question is, are they publicly accessible? Because there seems to be a lot of, there's a knowledge gap, ignorance when it comes to what is expected of a tenant, what is expected of a landlord, how long do I have before I can be thrown out? So do people have access to these laws? Where can they find them?
Yes. All laws are public documents, and then they are valuable in the public space. And then let's say if anyone is completely ignorant, engage a lawyer, and then a lawyer can educate you on what these provisions are. Or otherwise, you go to the bookshops or where other legal materials are sold. You can procure one And that is good that you even have asked this question. There are a lot of legal instruments that are valuable that are very directly connected with our day-to-day activities that citizens of this country have to, if you like, heighten their interest in the laws that regulate their activities day to day, and then get enlightened and educated, even personally, before you talk about some explanation that a lawyer, an expert in the law, will give to you. So the tenancy laws are available. You go to a bookshop, like let's say in River State, go around the court complex. If all bookshops in the markets don't sell some of these materials, just as the Constitution. There are many Nigerians who don't even have copies of the Constitution. They haven't even seen the Constitution. But then there are provisions in the Constitution that directly affect your activities and your rights day to day. So go to the bookshop, you pick them up. It's not something that is exclusive to lawyers. So even there are other books that have been written that have explained and simplified these provisions of the law, and then the relationship between landlord and tenant. This is very fundamental. Because this one happens every day, particularly in metropolitan centers as we are in Port Harcourt. More than 80% of the residents in Port Harcourt are tenants. But the same way, more than 90% of that 80% don't even know the rules and the laws that govern their relationship with their landlords. So it's important that they pick up those instruments. They are available in bookshops, particularly around the court complex. So go to any of the courts, you can ask of any law that is related to landlord-tenant relationship, and even some other small books that can explain this relationship. They are valuable and easily accessible. Then advice and opinion and legal opinion, are valuable if you engage a lawyer. You mustn't even be in this trouble before you engage a lawyer to seek to understand the provisions that govern your relationship with anybody.
Well,
now, let me quickly say this. It's the problem of not probably being proactive in this part of the world. Elsewhere, even when you think about engaging in a contract, you wouldn't first seek to know the rules and laws that govern that relationship you want to get into before you even get into it. Even in contract, in business, but because we want to avoid certain costs that the professional may charge you, which is very beneficial to you. You are incorporating a company, you want to get into business, you're a contractor, you want to bid for a job, but you know little or nothing about the laws that govern contracts, the laws that govern some of these areas you want to get into. And you deliberately want to avoid to consult an expert who will explain to you, even at a fee, yes, you're getting into business. But a lot of us get into business, get into these transactions without even knowing, or even the desirous of knowing what laws bind this relationship.
All right. Well, Ms. Ekine, we are in the digital age. I imagine a lot of people would prefer to read the Constitution on screen. There should be PDF documents that they can download as against going to actually buy the hard copy. Because, if you give me the option, buy the hard copy or have a copy on my phone, I would choose the latter. So
excellent, yes.
I'm hoping that, people can also download these files if and when they go online and they have it on their smart devices.
Yes, Sam, that's a very table advice. A lot of us young persons, and of course of all ages, we have this viable gadget, but how do you use it? So you're right. The same way when you ask, where are these materials? All the tenancy laws and also materials are available online on the click of your button on your phone. Even if at this moment, if you Google, you will get some literature and then some guides. Really, that's true.
All right. Well, we have a break coming up in about a minute. The important question, how this connects to the legal part of it. Should the police be involved in a tenancy dispute? We're hoping Ms. Ekine would answer that question after the break. Please stay with us. Conversation for this hour is connected to the body of a youth found in Woji, which has triggered a protest among the youths. They're asking important questions of the police. Nyebuchi Eke's body was found in a chair, and it seems, from all indications, he was tortured to death. My guest, Henry Ekine, is a human rights lawyer, and we're having conversations around the human rights violations that might be connected to this case. But more importantly, tenancy agreement, the laws that govern landlord and tenant relations, because that's how we got here. You're welcome once again, Ms. Ekine.
Yes, thank you, Sam.
All right. So you said earlier that the tenancy laws are state laws. That means that the laws in River State might be different from the tenancy laws in Lagos.
In Lagos and elsewhere.
Okay. Does that mean are there similarities though, even though they have differences?
Yes, fundamental similarities. They are almost in pari materia the same, except some specific differences. But what general principles that govern tenancy relationship apply to all the laws. What tenancy means, all of the statutory provisions with respect to many areas. So except some specifics that you may have, some laws have looked at peculiarities within the environment and included some provisions. That just has some slight differences you'll find. They are generally almost the same.
Okay. You can send your questions and contributions to 080-903-06-416. That's our WhatsApp number. We're live on Facebook and Twitter at Nigeria InfoPH. I'll be taking your comments on those platforms shortly. And not very long from now, I'll be opening the phone lines to hear your contributions. Now, Ms. Ekine, to the basic question, should the police be involved in a tenancy dispute? Because that's how we got here.
It's a definite no. And having answered that, it means that it is unlawful, illegal, and in any consideration, a violation of, if you like, the sanctity of the agreement between the parties in any tenancy agreement. Now, and the foundation is this. It's an important one, and thank you for this question. Tenancy is a civil relationship between landlord and tenant only. It is expressed in an agreement between these parties. Their obligations and their rights are expressed in this agreement, and they are only enforceable by and between these parties and a civil court through a civil process. There is no justification, there is no consideration, there is no provision for the police to get involved in the enforcement of the rights of the landlord and the rights of the tenant, or the obligations of the landlord or obligations of the tenant, howsoever, in the ordinary business and dealings between the landlord and the tenant. This has been a disturbing thing, and we have continually argued and quarreled and advocated on this issue. There is no way in the ordinary business of tenancy that the police is invited to enforce these obligations and rights howsoever. So, Sam, is a definite no. It is a purely civil transaction, just like we would always say. The police is not invited into any civil transaction between parties. The police is meant to get involved in criminal matters only. And I know that most of our listeners may not understand the line between criminal matters and civil matters. Criminal matters are offenses against the state. Civil offenses are offenses between and against individuals. When you say against the state, yes, maybe further explanation is that the state is not a human being per se, but the state protects the human beings, its citizens. So certain offenses have been provided in the substantive laws, substantive criminal law, to be offenses, so that even if somebody slaps you as a citizen, you will say, yes, the action of the perpetrator of the assailant is against you as an individual, but it has been provided in an extant substantive criminal law as a criminal offense because the state protects you as an individual.
Okay.
So that slap as assault is a criminal offense. You can report that assault to the police, and the police, in protection of you as a citizen, as state agent protecting the citizen, can then investigate the matter. And I'm very deliberate about the procedure. Can investigate that allegation, because that's the first step. Then, if need be, effect an arrest, because it's investigation before arrest. If need be, when they have prima facie evidence to prosecute that person with facts and evidence, then they approach a court for prosecution. That is criminal proceeding. Or in civil wrong between two individuals dealing in business like contracts and civil actions. Tenancy being an aspect of contract is civil action. Marital causes are civil actions. So when this now happens, the enforcement of the obligations or rights of parties is only through a civil action. So if as a tenant, the landlord has violated the provisions of the agreement and has infringed on your rights in that agreement or the general principles of tenancy, you go to court.
Okay. That means
so either seek a restraint.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So either seek a restraining order from court, restraining the landlord from continuing in that direction, or even when he's attempting to prevent him from taking that direction, or to compel a party to do a thing. Those are the civil actions you go to court to do.
Mm.
So take for instance, and let me be specific here with respect to tenancy relationship. What are these fundamental rights to the landlord, the owner of a property, who lets his property to a tenant? He has the right to be paid and receive rent. The rent could be expressed as to the way they agree, whether in pecuniary monetary terms or some other considerations of value. Now he has that right. Then on the flip side of it, the tenant has the obligation to pay rent or to perform that obligation in the way it's expressed in the agreement, whether in some other consideration of value, if not monetary. The landlord also has a right of reversion. The tenancy is for a period. To say at the expiration of this period, my right to the ownership of my property will revert to me. So, taking these two fundamental rights of the landlord, if the tenant is acting in such a way that seeks to threaten the right of the landlord or deny his right of reversion or right to rent and all of that, then of course you will go to court to enforce it. On the other hand, for a tenant who has a right to quiet and peaceful occupation of that property, provided he is complying with the conditions in the agreement, you're paying your rent, you're paying other levies probably agreeable, and then you're complying with all of it, then you have the right to peaceful and quiet occupation. The landlord should not be disturbing you unnecessarily and in some erratic way. You can take an action against your landlord to prevent him from doing that.
We would have to.
You can take an action against your landlord to even prevent him from trespassing to that part of his property that he has led to you, provided the time is running.
All right. So we have some calls we need to take because the phone lines are blinking already, and I'd like to admit some of those calls. But very quickly, and this is as a follow-up to something you said, the police should not get involved. You should address it legally. But you see, sometimes they say desperate times call for desperate measures. If I return home, get back to my apartment, which I have rented, and find out, maybe I got home late at night, that the landlord has thrown my things out of the house. Now, at that particular time, it might not be convenient for me to start looking for a lawyer, to go and sue, to do all of that. If I pursue the process, I may not have a place to sleep that night. So the desperation of the situation might require, okay, let me go and get the police involved so that I can at least sleep in my house this night. Then maybe tomorrow we can now start looking for a lawyer. So could there be the desperation factor that might come to play in involving the police?
Sam, it's not even about desperation. That is outside of the realm of tenancy relationship. It becomes a criminal offense. Now let me come. I was just it's a long conversation in all of this, if your time would have permitted. As I was going on, there would have been those actions or inactions of either of these parties in this rather stable transaction that will constitute criminal offenses. Now, let me be quick to some of these. Forceful eviction is a criminal offense. And then this throwing out of property is forceful eviction. And it's criminal. It's not about even desperation. The action that is statutory and legitimate for that tenant to take is to go to the police. Now, let me make a distinction very clear now, so that even the police will maybe listening will say, but the earlier said that we shouldn't get involved. No. You get involved in criminal actions where there is violation of criminal provisions of criminal law. Get involved. Now, in this instance, where you forcefully evict a person, either by throwing out his property or by preventing, that is locking up somebody's house, or willfully damaging. Willful damage in this case is criminal offense. It is clear in the instant criminal law. Willful damage in the sense that you probably broke the door, or you disconnect utilities, you damage utility lines, or you de-roof a building because you're a landlord. And Sam, there is no justification for any of these criminal acts. Even if the tenant is owing you 1 billion naira, the option is to go the civil way. Like I said, that is the relationship, the civil contractual relationship of tenancy. But that action of a landlord to willfully damage the roof and expose the tenant to danger is no longer in the realm of the civil relationship of tenancy.
Okay.
I have just read out the obligations and rights of the tenant and the landlord in a tenancy relationship. It does not include breaking the door or forcibly removing a door or forcibly parking someone's property outside. Those ones are criminal offenses, and those are the justified instances that either the landlord or the tenant, where it happens, can involve the police. And you could see here now, the police has come in not to enforce the tenancy agreement. The police has come in not to protect the rights or enforce the obligation of either of these parties in the civil transaction, but to enforce a criminal law and the violation of the criminal law, which is within the purview of the police clearly. So let's say a landlord assaults a tenant because he's owing him money. It's no longer a tenancy relationship. It becomes assault. If you can slap your landlord, your tenant because he has supposed to pay you, right? Then you say it is tenancy relationship. It's not. There's a clear distinction between the tenancy relationship and obligations and rights and the assault by the landlord or even the tenant beating up a landlord because he's coming to demand for rent.
Okay. We would
So
have to...
those are the instances that can justify a clear report to the security agencies, including the police, on grounds of allegation of commission of a criminal offense.
All right. So let's get to the listener now. 0817-923-0002. 0817-923-0003. The youth in Woji protested thanks to what started as a landlord-tenancy dispute, and now it has led to the death of a man whose body was dumped in Ekine. So if you have any questions for the legal practitioner, now will be the time to make your voice heard. Braid is calling from Buguma. Good morning, Braid.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, my question is this. Now, landlord and tenant relationship, and there is a tenant and landlord agreement, and the tenant violated the agreement. For instance, in the agreement, there is a stipulated that the tenant, the landlord can increase his rent as at when due. And the landlord look at it and review his rent. Can the tenant come to say, why didn't you sit down with me and discuss before you review the rent? That's number one. Number two, can landlord also look at the tenant if he refuses to pay his rent? And he's abusing the landlord, insulting him anyhow. Can the landlord report to the relevant agencies like police to arrest him and prosecute him? Thank you. That's my question.
Okay, thank you very much, Braid. I'll have to add other calls. Vincent from Bonny Island, good morning. All right, Vincent, we don't have a lot of time. Robin calls from HA. Good morning, Robin.
Good morning, Oracle, once more.
Good morning. Please go ahead.
Barrister Ekine have given those who don't have ear or who don't understand a very free lecture this morning. But the problem I think we're having is that police is always overzealous. When once they are invited or called for any complaint, even if it's a simple matter, that police on the desk should advise the complainant to do the right thing that is a civil matter, they will get up to jump into it. If a tenant is owing a landlord rent, what is the business of the landlord breaking into his house and throwing his properties outside? That action of the such landlord is criminal. But it's not to mean that having done so, the police wade in when the criminal aspect has been established, that they will not go there, beat up the young man. Today the young man is dead. Landlord should learn. Okay. And Commissioner of Police should give us his response today. Okay. To murder the farmer.
Oh, thank you very much, Robin. In this particular case, it is the landlord that has died, not the tenant. David calls from Yenagoa. Good morning, David.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Sam.
Good morning.
From the city of Yenagoa.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. See, in the first place, I'm worried because how can an incident happen in another place and the body is discovered in a tree? It's cause for worry. And again, for me, I think it is not the responsibility of police to use torture to ascertain or obtain testimonies or statements from any of its suspects. As far as I know, torture is against the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, even the Police Act. It's against it. So I don't see any reason why in obtaining a statement from a suspect, police will use force, torture, to the extent of the death of the person. Now, the young man is dead. Police will do further investigation and prosecute the officer, the IPO in charge. Let him give the explanations that led to the death of the man. I think landlord and tenant issue, these things are very clear.
Right.
I believe if landlords or tenants who is going to take a house from a landlord, they go by way of tenancy agreement. It's just a simple agreement. With that tenancy agreement, it solves almost all the problems we are going to get. So, tenancy agreement is something we cannot do immediately.
Thank you very much, David. Yes, indeed. I believe there's an anti-torture act from, if I'm not mistaken, 2017. So, yes, you're right. Temple calls from HA. Good morning, Temple.
Good morning, the very distinguished oracle. Please permit me to start with Barrister Henry Ekine.
Yes, please go ahead.
I think, in as much as I am concerned, you look at the tenants agreement, it's all embedded to benefit the tenant. Someone who lives in your house, it is already stated in the agreement here. The stipulated time you should be able to make his payment as at when his rent expires. Then a tenant is living in your house, his rent is expired, you have served him quick notice, he refused to park, you start court order, he refused to park, he has been there for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, still living in your house. Even buying some good things in his house, which you can see. What else do we want the landlord to do? If such a tenant refuses to park, then he will still occupy that house. Till God knows when you will decide to leave. Is that the way to go? Thank you so much. At the same time, police should be held responsible to what happened to the body of that young man.
Okay.
There is no two ways about it. We have asked questions this morning, and police should begin to provide answers to those questions with immediate alacrity. Because a check cannot be paid black all the time.
It's okay, Temple. Thank you very much. Too many questions begging answers. Well, the case is currently with the state CID, and we're waiting on the investigation of the police. But important questions that have been asked. The first caller said, should the landlord engage with the tenant when reviewing the rent? You know, some people complain, landlord, it's too soon, it's too sudden, it's too high. So he's asking, if I want to review my own rent, do I need to agree with the tenant, or is something I can just do? And the second question is, if the tenant refuses to pay, insults the landlord, can the landlord report to relevant agencies? So let's have answers to those questions.
Yes, very quickly. Let me start by saying that there is a principle in contract law, pacta sunt servanda. It simply means respect the terms of the contract, respect the contract. And then every contract is made of clauses and terms that have been mutually agreed by both parties and executed, meaning that you're bound by those terms. Now, it is fundamental that the rent, when it comes to tenancy, that rent is a fundamental term on any tenancy agreement, whether it's tenancy or a lease, that's a longer tenancy, if you like. Mm-hmm. Now, since rent is a fundamental term, it is expressed on that agreement. If the rent is 1 naira per month, it is expressed, so it becomes a fundamental part of the agreement. And neither party of this contract can vary any of the clauses in the agreement without the involvement of the other. And any foundation, because this comes to us every day. Since the agreement bounds both parties, and then as it binds both parties, and the rent is stated there as a term, the landlord cannot unilaterally, forget about what actually happens in real time. The landlord is not permitted to unilaterally rise one day and say, my rent has changed from what we agreed it should be to something else.
We're almost out of time, Mr. Ekine. We're almost out of time. But this thing you have said, the problem it will cause is plenty, sir.
Yes, but that's why the courts are there. Either party could err in violation of the provisions of the agreement. So that's why it requires the procedure very quickly, is that you notify. It's not that the landlord does not have the right to review rent, and you can't do so in the middle of a term. So you notify the tenant that, look, let's talk. I am having a reason to review my rent. And then the tenant cannot stop you because he has the choice to either renew or not to renew.
Okay. I sincerely...
Another one in terms of recovery.
Yeah.
Somebody talks about recovery. Now, recovery procedure for recovery does not take time. Someone say a tenant will be in your house for 2 years, 3 years, and you told him to leave. No, there's no way a tenant will be in your house for 2, 3 years if you actually asked him to leave. Except you're indulging him. Because the procedure is this. If it's a yearly tenant, you give him the notice at the appropriate time.
Okay.
Not later than 6 months in the current time.
Barrister Ekine, we literally have 30 seconds. I sincerely apologize. This shouldn't be a longer conversation. But thank you very much for your time, sir. I'm hoping we'll have other opportunities to engage.
I do appreciate it. It's a wonderful opportunity.
Yes,
thank
indeed.
you very much.
Have yourself a wonderful day. This is as far as we can fly in the morning crossfire. Due to be with us shortly for Harcourt. Please stay with us.
The show continues after this break.